and we pointed this out in the past. A human being is so fickle, so to say, in terms of where we stand, and we can easily be influenced in either direction. And everything is at stake. Because since man was endowed with free choice, we're culpable and liable for whatever the choice is. We make the right choice, we're deserving, because it was due to our initiative, and when we make the wrong choice, we're held fully liable for that wrong choice, because we didn't have to make that wrong choice. I mean, so literally, life is basically walking a tightrope. You know, you go slightly to the right, you're okay. But if you tilt to the left, we got a serious problem. But simultaneously, God created the human being that he's the most impressionable creation of existence. And therefore, as Rambam said, if you put yourself in the right environment, expose yourself to the right kinds of people, function in a context of good values, that person will easily do the right thing because you are so impressionable. And because, as a result of that, understanding and appreciating that, the upside, you understand the downside also exists. If you expose yourself to an environment, allows you to be an environment which is negative, because you are so impressionable, you're going to be affected and impacted by that, and you can assume those values, those perspectives, and that behavior pattern. But it's up to us where you go. I'll give you an example. You have a boat. It has no motor. All it has is a rudder. You have a rudder on the boat. And the current is fierce, the current in the water. And you're strong enough to turn that rudder even against the current. But if you turn the rudder into the current, that current, because of its power, will take you in the direction you want to go. Although you're not providing the power. You're only making a movement which is directing the power, which can maybe take you upstream rather than off the falls. But if you don't move that rudder, where does the current take you? It takes you off the falls. That's exactly what life's about. Where do we turn? Where do we turn? Do we turn to the right, meaning allow ourselves to be exposed to what God wants us to be exposed to? The good people, tzaddikim, chachomim, who have the values and the perspectives which God wants us to have, which automatically will engender behavior which is spiritual behavior, or expose yourself to those who are totally divorced from that, which automatically will expose you to something negative. So it's all up to us. So although we walk a tightrope, but ultimately it's our decision where we want to go. And where you place yourself, that will secure you to be in a good place. The Gemara tells us in Chagiga, there was one of the great rabbis of the Talmud. He was the teacher of Rameir Balanes. His name was Elisha bar Avuya. And Elisha bar Avuya, you can imagine, he was Rameir's Rebbe, teacher. And he became a heretic. He gave it all up. Why did he give it all up? Although he's a great Torah sage, from the greatest, because he had witnessed something and it rattled him so badly, he came to the conclusion, because if that could happen, there's no judge, there's no judgment, there's no rhyme or reason, and he says, I'm out of here. And he turned his back on God. What did he see? The Torah tells us that if one respects his father and mother, you will merit longevity, long years. And the Torah tells us that if you come upon a bird, a kosher bird, nesting on its chicks, on its eggs, and you send away the mother bird and to take the chicks or the eggs, you will merit longevity. He witnesses, a father says to a son, climb the ladder and send away the mother bird to retrieve the chicks or the eggs. And the son follows exactly the directive of the father, and he falls when he's doing the mitzvah, and he falls to his death. So he asked the question to himself, how's this possible? The Torah says that if you do one of them, you merit longevity. Here it's compounded, and he falls to his death. Therefore, he says, if that's the case, les din v'les dayan. There's no judgment, there's no judge. It's all a bunch of nonsense. And he gave it up. And what did he do? The first thing he did. It was Shabbos. It was Shabbos when he saw this. He goes to a brothel. Could you imagine? This great rabbi goes to a brothel and he knocks on the door and he says, I'd like to be accommodated. So he said, aren't you Rabbi so-and-so? He says, no. And she says, but how could you not be? He goes out to the garden and it's on Shabbos and there's a turnip growing in the ground and he pulls the turnip out of the ground, which is a Torah violation. That's called reaping. You're not permitted to reap on Shabbos. One of the 39 activities you're not permitted to do. And he pulls it out and he says, Acherani, I'm not the person who you think I am. And he went into the brothel and they serviced him. This is what happened. So the Gemara asks a question. A man who's so immersed in Torah, and Torah is supposed to protect you. It's supposed to dismantle the evil inclination. It's the antidote to all the desire, all this negative stuff. Why didn't the Torah protect him? So the Talmud answers, he himself used to read Greek plays. He was involved in erotica, things which touched upon aroused his sexuality. And because he was so attached to that, the Torah wasn't able to give him that perspective, because when he studied, it was tinged with this other stuff. That's why the Torah wasn't the antidote. But you can't have one foot in the mud and the other foot in the holiness. You got to remove yourself totally, because he walked both sides of the fence simultaneously. That's the reason why the Torah didn't protect him. But if he would have been on one side, not on the other side, the Torah would have protected him. His colleagues, his students, his peers, the environment. So everything is choice. Where do you want to put yourself? Well, a person goes to shul, prays 3 times a day, and then he goes to work, and he socializes with women in his office. You know? And they're not dressed properly, and they're not really necessarily observant, and they discuss subject matters which may be inappropriate for a married man. Who's that? You put your hand in the fire, you get burnt. That's a reality. You know, a human being is not an angel. Human being is subject to every level of influence. So here you're in shul in the morning. You get a full dose in the morning and the afternoon of this other stuff. Come home at night, and you're going to study a little bit at night. I mean, you're close enough to the woman that her perfume is on your clothing, and you're going to study at nighttime. What do you think? This guy's is going to generate great levels of holiness? You can't straddle both sides of the fence. You got to make a decision. You want to do it right. You want to be safe and removed from this. Put yourself on the right side of the fence. You want to straddle both sides of the fence, then you walk in that tightrope. You walk that tightrope, one slight movement, you can fall to your death. And that's what happened to Elisha ben Avuya. When he saw this, that pushed him over the edge. And he says, I'm giving it all up. It means nothing, no rhyme, no reason. Everything's random. I'm out of here. He was only looking for an excuse, an escape clause. That's what happened. And he quotes a verse in Mishlei, Hu Shlomo Omer, Holech es chachomim yechkam. A person who walks with wise men, you become wiser. V'roek silim yeroah. But if you shepherd hedonists or fools, you're raw. You're going to become spoiled. You can become evil. I always say, a person has a 60 IQ. He's not a fool. He's limited. Person has 100, 200 IQ, and he behaves like a person who has no brains. He's a fool. Because you should know better, and you don't act differently than you should know. That's Aksil. Aksil is a person who allows his desires to overtake him, and he doesn't behave and act responsibly. The one who shepherds and associates with those kinds of people, ultimately he'll become evil. There's a famous chinuch. The chinuch was a codifier, codified all the 613 precepts of the Torah. And when he codifies it, what they are, he gives a rational reason, a philosophical reason for each one of them. The Torah tells us that when you eat the Paschal Lamb, Korban Pesach, there's a negative commandment that you're not permitted to break the bone, although there's a mitzvah to eat the meat of the Paschal Lamb on the 15th night of Nisan. That was the Seder night in the time of the temple. But you're not permitted to break the bone to take the marrow out of the bone, although the marrow in the bone is meat. But you're not permitted to break the bone to take the marrow out. So the chinuch says, what exactly is the philosophical reason? Why? Because what is Pesach? What are we celebrating? We're celebrating freedom. We became free men. Now, who breaks bones to take marrow out of bones? Who gnaws on bones? So maybe you're a dog. A dog gnaws on bones. A person who's destitute doesn't have what to eat. He has to gnaw on a bone to take out the marrow. But a free man, he doesn't gnaw on bones. So the chinuch says, since you have to demonstrate freedom the 15th night of Nisan at the Seder, and the Paschal Lamb is essential in celebrating your freedom, as you act celebrating freedom, you can't behave like this destitute person who behaves like a dog who gnaws on bones. So he says, maybe you'll ask, does it really make a difference? You enjoy the marrow, break it openly, does it really make a difference? Says the only person who asked that question, a person who doesn't really appreciate what life's all about. Because there's a known rule of thumb, fact, that a person is a product of his behavior. The way you behave, that's what you become. And he explains it. You have a person who's a tzaddik, and he's compelled and forced to do acts of evil. He doesn't want, against his will. He's compelled and forced to do acts of evil. Although he's a tzaddik, ultimately, he'll become evil. Because a man is a product of his actions. And if you have a person who's evil, and you coerce him and force him to acts of righteousness over an extended period of time, ultimately he'll become righteous. Because a man is a product of his actions. Therefore, understand what the Torah is saying. Since you have to behave and be in a position to internalize what it means free, doing that action by breaking the bone to take the marrow, that's counterproductive to what we're trying to accomplish. Because a man is a product of his actions. Now, literally what he's saying is exactly what the Rambam says. The human being is the only creature that was created who's impressionable, that what we do, who we're associated with, who our peer group is, that will determine who we become. Because that level of impression will cause us to do either acts of righteousness, to have a correct perspective, appropriate perspective, or something which is distorted and corrupted and perverted. That's exactly this, what the Rambam's saying here. Many years ago, when I had my children, and so there was the childbirth, and one time they would give women this twilight drug when she go into labor, and she would deliver. But then afterwards, they came out with what? Natural childbirth. That a woman was able, if she went to classes, and it was called the Lamaze method, and she'd go and she'd be trained exactly, and she'd have a coach, and she'd be able to give birth without any type of anesthesia. And it was healthy for the child. Because if the mother has anesthesia, it can affect the child, or the mother has the block till she recovers from it, this and that. Lamaze. What was the Lamaze method based upon? It was called the Pavlovian theory. There was a Russian doctor, Pavlov. He trained a dog, not a human being, to actually assume a certain behavior pattern. And if you behave the dog long enough, it behaves as you trained it to behave in that pattern. What it had to do with meat, it would, whatever you presented with a piece of meat in a certain way, you gave it an order, it behaved a certain way. And it assumed that became its behavior. So the human being, even more so, that if you train the person with breathing and this and that and instruction and commands, the person will not feel the pain, and the woman will be able to deliver without any difficulty. Okay, that was the Lamaze, Pavlovian theory. This is Adam Nifel Kivi Puloso. This is exactly, man is a product of your actions, of your behavior. You assume a behavior pattern long enough, that's what you become. Omer Ashri Ish. He says, fortunate is the man who is associated with good people. V'chein, the Rambam says, if you live in a municipality which their customs and the behavior patterns are evil, people are dishonest. It was a known fact, Warsaw was known for pickpockets. When you went to Warsaw, you had to be careful, you shouldn't be pickpocketed. If you left, when you went into the train station, was known, you had to keep your eyes on your bags, because if you turned your eye for a moment, your bags disappeared. So that kind of environment, it engenders certain things, because those are the kind of people that are there. And because of the value system, people don't walk a straight line. They don't behave appropriately. You should leave that community and go to a location that the people of tzaddikim are righteous, and they conduct themselves in the manner of, in the context of goodness. That's where you should go. So I'm not sure. You live in New York City. What is it? You walk down that street, you see all kinds of things on the street. When I originally moved from Baltimore to New York, when I lived in Baltimore, I lived on the campus. The campus itself had faculty housing and graduate student housing, and all you saw was only everything within the context of Torah, nothing but that. Your children were not exposed to anything negative. It was a pure, pristine environment in the physical sense and the spiritual sense. If I'm going to New York, I wanted one thing, a similar setting that I should be able to have for my family. I didn't want to move to Brooklyn, to the city. In those days, when I moved to Muncie, to Rockland County, it wasn't as populated as today. The streets were clean and pure, both in the physical sense and the spiritual sense. That's what it was. So it was an environment was similar to where they were raised and they were born in Baltimore for that reason. And that's it. You want it to be as close as you can to what is appropriate. Sometimes you can't, but you do your best to have it more positive rather than more negative. But the Rambam says, the Rambam says, what about if all the communities, all the countries, what you hear, what you know, what you hear, The behavior is not good. They don't behave appropriately. The Rambam says, like in our time, Rambam's right in his own time, till the year 1250. Hear this? The behavior is not appropriate. Is not derech lo tova, not in a good way. Oh, mipnei acholi. Person's not able to go to that other community either because the roads are dangerous, because the marauders on the roads, bandits, or because the person is in ill health, he can't travel. He can't travel to another location. Yeshu levado yechidi. You should stay away from everyone. Just be in solitary confinement. Kinyan shenema yeshiv bodo vido. You should stay all by yourself and remain silent. It's not easy. You can't live on a desert island. A human being needs some social relationship. Nevertheless, if the alternative is going on in the minefield, and every step you take, you may actually be blown to smithereens. It may cost you your life. And the alternative, stay at home. But I need that social excitement. You'll have more than social excitement. You go through that minefield. Because I'm not sure if you can make it to the other side. What happens if they don't let him alone? They don't let him alone. They keep knocking on his door and they want that he should join them. If you have to go into a cave, into some kind of crevice in a mountain, or into the desert, that's what you do. Now, there's a book that just came out. Osco put out a book. It's worthwhile to read. There was a rabbi, very holy rabbi. He was born in Romania, and he lived in Russia and the Ukraine. He was known as the Ribnitzer Rebbe. Ribnitz. He lived in a city called Ribnitz, which was in Russia. And he was a very holy man. He was a miracle worker, literally a miracle worker. Story. It's worthwhile to read the book. And it's not fairy tales, because the witnesses who are beneficiaries of what he did. And there's a story over there. Listen to the story. There was this young Jewish man. He was going to marry a shiksa, a non-Jewish woman, at a time where they would be, due to the assimilation in Russia, unfortunately, it wasn't uncommon. And his father of this young man came to Ribnitzer Rebbe, he had a relationship, and he pleaded with him to pray for his son that he should not marry this non-Jewish woman. Although his son wasn't educated, wasn't learned, nothing, but still. So the Rebbe called him in and said to him, you realize you're a Jew, you're not permitted to marry this woman. If you marry, you're cutting off your Jewish line. It's going to come to an end. He said, I'm going to marry anyway. I love her, I'm marrying her. He says, you know something? I don't think so. You're going to realize within 24 hours that you're not marrying her. Okay? Very holy rabbi. He was a Kabbalist. He was able to do miracles. What happens? He gets a call. His fiancée was killed in a car accident. Okay? So the man's no fool. He understands. He put two and two together. He comes to the rabbi. And he wants to hear what's going on. This man had something on the ball. So he says to him like this: if you want to be in a good place for the rest of your life, he's a secular Jew, this Russian Jew. Grow a beard and payas. Here? And if you grow a beard and payas, you'll be safe for the rest of your life. Be secular. Could you imagine? Big side locks with a beard. No hat. Hear this? Nothing. Grow the beard and payas. Okay? He applied for a visa that he wants to move to Israel. and he received the visa. He leaves Russia. He goes on to a kibbutz, a Shomer Hatzair kibbutz, an atheistic kibbutz. Could you imagine? A beard, payas, working on the kibbutz. And he was very talented, and people liked him. But the way he looks like, he just doesn't fit the mold or the profile of who's on the kibbutz. So they come to him and they say, something, we value very much who you are, what you are, your personality, you fit in, but your profile doesn't fit in there. We advise you, take a haircut and cut off those side locks. The words of the Rebbe resonate in his ear. He says, you should never, ever cut off that beard and those payas, those side locks. And he says, I'm sorry, I can't. So they figured with time, they'll influence, eventually cut it off. They wait another 2 months, another person, head of the kibbutz, comes to him, and if God tries to convince him, he says, I'm just telling you now, I will never cut it off in any circumstance. He didn't give him any reasons. We'll never. So they said, if you will never, then we have to put you out of the kibbutz. We live as a community. Everybody has to look the same and have the same perspective. You don't fit in, you're out. So he takes his little satchel and he starts walking down the road. He's a little despondent, and he's walking. He has nobody in the world. His family's back in Russia. He's all by himself, and he thought this would be the beginning of a new life. And as he's walking down the road, and he has a beard, payas, and he has a hat on his head because the sun is beating down, and a car stops and gives a honk, and says, and it was religious. He says, "Would you like a lift?" Invites him in, and he says to him, "Where are you going?" He says, "I'm going to Bnei Brak," the driver. Going to Bnei Brak. He says, what did he have to lose? He's going nowhere. He has nowhere to go. Goes to Bnei Brak. In Bnei Brak, there was a yeshiva for Russians, a Balchuva yeshiva. When he heard there were other Russians, he enrolled. And because of that, he became an observant Jew. He married, had a family. That was the story. So because he had that beard and payas, that's why he's put out of the kibbutz. That's what saved him. And the Rebbe, who has this foresight into the future, said, you want to be in a good place, never, ever cut off that beard and payas. And because he would not succumb to all their convincing, that's why ultimately he turned around totally. Where he could have married that non-Jewish woman, and his life would have been spiritually a disaster. Yanig Atzo B'der Chatoim. Under those circumstances, you should conduct yourself like a sinner. Person says, I have no choice. I wish I could. No such thing as I wish I could. David Mel says, who will put me in the desert, in that domicile of sojourners, of guests? Could you imagine in the Mojave Desert, there's a outpost, no running water, no air conditioning, not even windows, infested with mosquitoes. You catch malaria, and you have mosquito nets, and you have no choice because the alternative is not acceptable. So somebody says, I'm going to say this joke, I once joined the Peace Corps. That's exactly what we had when I joined the Peace Corps. Okay, Larry, remember the Peace Corps? Okay, either you belong to the foreign, the Foreign Legion, or you belong to the Peace Corps, one or the other. Okay,